Out of all the decks to draft for Modern Masters 3, it seems like people have the most trouble drafting black-red sacrifice decks. And I see so many Vampire Aristocrats and so many Mortician Beetles being passed in the draft, and it is really hard to pull off. Because I think people see cards that make tokens, and they think, oh, this would combo really great with Vampire Aristocrat who can sacrifice these tokens. And that works, and obviously cards that make tokens fit really well in this deck, but you really need to avoid stuff like that because it's so hard to make this combo work because it requires so many pieces to function. And so you need to have cards that do multiple things in order to make this deck work. So for example, Kathari Bomber combos really well with Mortician Beetle and Vampire Aristocrat. So instead of putting things that make tokens like kind of like Goblin Assault, like you generally want to avoid cards like this. I mean, I put Goblin Assault in because it's a recurring ability so you can sack it each turn to make it more of a control deck. Like Dragon Fodder that puts 2 Goblin tokens into play for 2. I would avoid that because you're really not getting value out of that. So instead of going for things like Goblin Assault, go for things like Kathari Bomber because you get to do a lot more with just this one card. So say you have Mortician Beetle out, Vampire Aristocrat out, and then you play Kathari Bomber. So say it's like turn 1 Mortician Beetle, turn 3 Kathari Bomber, and turn 4 Vampire Aristocrat. When you attack your opponent with Kathari Bomber and it's sacrificed, it triggers Mortician Beetle, right? So it automatically becomes a 2/2. Then you get 2 tokens, right? And then those tokens can feed the Vampire Aristocrat, which then sacrifices those tokens, which makes Mortician Beetle bigger. And the best part about Kathari Bomber is that it has Unearth, so you can do it again. That's the kind of value you want to be going for. And if you don't get value like that, then it's really hard to win with this deck. Because instead of pumping this deck full of tokens, like things like Goblin Assault to make tokens, you instead get to fill it with removal. And so you see we have a good amount of removal in this deck. We have Seal of Doom, which is a solid removal card, Grizzly Spectacle, which you see a bunch of those being passed around, Thunderous Wrath is okay, and Augur Spree. So a ton of removal here. And the other thing is this deck works well to sacrifice your opponent's creatures. So instead of making tokens and sacrificing your own creatures, you can use things like Zealous Conscripts, which we have 2 of here, to gain control of your opponent's creatures and then sacrifice them. And that works really well. And so same thing with Traitorous Instinct. So this is a deck that went 3-0 and it didn't win every single game because sometimes you just don't pull off the right combo. You know, you find yourself with like, awkward combinations of cards in your hand. But overall, this is a pretty solid deck. Good removal. It gets really big really quickly, and if your opponent doesn't deal with you early on, it gives them problems. And usually this deck, sacrifice decks, fall victim to getting their key cards being taken out, like Vampire Aristocrat and Mortician Beetle. But we have a good number of each. We have 3 Vampire Aristocrats, 3 Mortician Beetles, and even if we lose one, we could always use Torrent of Souls to get them back. So it's a pretty solid deck. No, plus we have Damnation. Damnation is a really solid addition to any deck, but it's nice that we have that as well. But anyways, let's just take a look at what this deck looks like in action. So this game pretty much summarizes how most of the games went in this tournament. You see we get set up really quickly. We get Mortician Beetle out turn 1, followed by another Mortician Beetle that's going to come up, and a Kathari Bomber is there as well. And just having Kathari Bomber and the Mortician Beetles out is a really powerful combo because you can sacrifice Kathari Bomber twice. And then we follow up with Vampire Aristocrat, and things get pretty big pretty quickly. Even though our opponent's off to a pretty okay start, I mean, the card they have is not that great. I usually avoid it when I'm drafting. But, anyways, just watch this. It's just so satisfying to see this. So you get the sacrifice happening, get the 2/2 Mortician Beetles. Oh, man, anyways. It's so nice. I mean, obviously there's some decks that we could have gone up against that would have really given us trouble. But the synergy, you just see the synergy working, and it just feels so satisfying. Because of all the decks, the sacrifice deck is highly synergistic compared to some other decks, where you run into a lot of Esper control decks or Grixis control decks that have almost no synergy whatsoever, but still manage to win. So it's nice when you see a deck like this that's just pure synergy, and when it wins, it's just so nice. So here's where removal comes into play really well. We have a lot of little creatures or mid-sized creatures right now, and getting rid of that Wall of Frost is a huge deal for us, and then just finishing here is its game. So that basically summarized most of the games that happened in this tournament. So key thing here, avoid cards that only make creature tokens because these don't do enough. You want to go for cards like Kathari Bomber that do multiple things and combo that with Mortician Beetle and Vampire Aristocrat. And if you're unlucky and you don't pull a Vampire Aristocrat, you can always go with things like Scorched Rusalka, which also sacrifices creatures, even though it's not nearly as good. But you can still combo it with Zealous Conscripts and Traitorous Instinct, because nothing's more satisfying than stealing your opponent's creature for a turn and then sacrificing it right when you're about to give it back. That's all for now, and I hope to see you again soon.